Yeah, so Assemble sort of started through essentially 2 self-build projects. So the first one was the Cineroleum in 2010, and we'd graduated from our bachelor's, largely doing architecture, had come out into the world just after the kind of 2008 financial crash. Jobs are scarce, lots of sites are empty. The jobs we were getting were fairly depressing a lot of the time, and I guess there was a real feeling of trying to work together again in the way that we had done at university and at students, and a kind of optimism that happens when you're a student that exists less as sometimes as a kind of lowly professional. And we found this kind of abandoned petrol station that had a housing development that had stalled because of the economy, and kind of each member put in sort of £50 of their own money and came together to kind of do this like initial self-build project where we kind of designed it, built it. So here this photo is as a kind of mass production of new chairs for the cinema. We programmed it, we made the uniforms, we made the signs, we chose the films, we managed it, and it was this kind of like relatively ad hoc, relatively improvised, very amateur way of I guess exploring our agency as designers in public, like I said, in quite a naive way. So this is a picture of the kind of completed installation. And so the Folly for a Flyover was our second project, which kind of came out. There were kind of £40,000 of funding for various art installations that existed around the Olympic Park while it was under construction. And it was in some ways it was a similar project. We proposed this idea of this design that was a kind of invented mythology of the nail house, the kind of house that was there before the development happened. Again, this time we were an incredibly ad hoc group. This was what we were living. A couple of us were living in this kind of big shared house. This is a kind of early meeting with the model, and a similar process of kind of building it ourselves, designing it ourselves. This kind of temporary, very immediate action. And so this was the site as found, and like I said, the design idea was this sort of invented house that existed in the middle of this kind of flyover. And the practice sort of evolved out of an enjoyment and a value in working together in a very non-hierarchical, very collaborative way, in a very immediate way, and thinking about how, I guess, as a young designer, young architect, you could try and explore your collective agency to enact change in the environment around you. We sort of started talking about how actually maybe this could be an organization that could exist beyond temporary projects and could have a real existence. And then the kind of real step in cementing that was securing our own workspace. And I guess through doing that and through the kind of started coming to an idea about a key idea about the importance of making kind of space for, I guess, creative working. And the idea that actually that we'd sort of started to coalesce around a working method that was about prototyping, was about fabricating, was about testing things out materially, large models, and these are things that really need space. But also we really enjoyed in that process kind of with all these, like, collaborating very closely with fabricators and with suppliers and with materials. And so that kind of started as this kind of underpinning with this kind of beginning to do a lot of our work about making space, kind of create collective spaces. And this approach that's about, I guess, a very holistic idea about the kind of activities that come under architecture. So programming, business planning, fundraising. So, I mean, the next set of projects is kind of like an ongoing work, which I think it kind of talks to all these different elements and their its entirety. So it's a set of projects called the Granby 4 Streets, which it's an area of Liverpool that was very prosperous in the beginning of the 20th century. It was tied to the docks, then the docks had developed. It was one of the first like multicultural areas in the UK and in Europe. Because of the docks, it kind of had people from all around the world, a very big Somali population, big South African population. But I guess in common with lots of post-industrial cities, suffered a kind of fairly precipitous decline, and the kind of solution that was proposed, and what these two maps show, was basically demolition of the existing housing, rebuilding at lower density. Somehow that would bring the market up. And so what you see here is the map is on the 1950s, the kind of original street grid with Granby Street running down the middle with this kind of really vibrant high street, to what we saw in 2013, where only 4 streets are remaining. That's why it's the Granby 4 streets.
Yep.
And the real problem was that you replace an area that had real material culture, real value, real heritage, and also real community kind of infrastructure existing within it, with kind of very nondescript, very soulless, like suburban developments with nothing else but housing as well. So there's no shops, there's no cafes, there's no pubs. In a way that the local council kind of had to do a bit of a mea culpa later and be like, actually, that was a bit of a fuck up. We created the situation, and actually we've left it worse. We've moved people away from their homes, and we've replaced it with nothing. And then we were brought this into the area by a woman called Xanthi Hamilton, who was working with this group of residents who'd refused to move out of these 4 streets. And at the time had sort of taken matters into their own hands. They'd sort of started painting the empty streets to make them feel less hostile and less kind of oppressive. They started gardening the streets, and that was a kind of hugely important thing, like that little kind of act of rebellion. Kind of lots of murals. They started organizing street markets. So this is much later. This is only a couple of years ago, and kind of built into kind of quite a big bi-monthly event. And we met them kind of just at this moment where they'd kind of gained enough credibility in the eyes of the council. They were negotiating being transferred, originally 10, but then that moved up to 15, and now it's kind of still growing houses. So kind of as a test bed to try and see what they could do. And this is partly also the council who had run out of money and didn't know what to do with these houses. They had no more ideas.
Yeah.
And so we started, and I guess what the residents say why they really enjoyed working with us is that we started, rather than coming with an idea about, okay, we're going to demolish everything, going to start again, we're going to knock it all down and rebuild, we started a process of really carefully talking and listening to them and understanding from their perspective what was really valuable about the area, but also what was challenging, what was problematic, and created this sort of, I guess, quite like wide-ranging, but quite, what's the word one? Like opportunistic master plan that identified a range of different sites, a range of opportunities that you could slowly develop over time. And so rather than needing 5 million, 10 million pounds of investment and you start again, that you could actually slowly chip away at the area and over time kind of redevelop it in a way that also didn't require wholesale removal of people, didn't require people having to leave their homes. It's not dissimilar to the Lacton Vassal solution with the tower, where you try and keep people in situ as much as possible. And the first project with that was, I guess, restoring 10 houses on the street, and they were in kind of varying states of disrepair. This is a kind of fairly typical example where you can see the roof has fallen in, the scaffold's holding it up.
Yep.
And with very low budgets, sort of about 60,000 to 70,000 pounds per house, was about carefully bringing them back into use, and then using the money really carefully to put in kind of a few moments of real specialness. So careful things like color, and then through being embedded in the site, enable us to kind of be much more, I guess, similarly like kind of forensic in our approach to it. And this sign was something that really struck us, which is, all items of value have been removed from the property. And I guess for us, it's like that's also quite depressing. It's like you're talking about someone's home, and the first thing they've done is strip out anything of any kind of care. Yeah. And so, as a key part of that project was this thing about how you reserved about 5% of the budget for these things we called enhancements, and kind of most emblematically being the kind of fireplaces that were. So each new house had a kind of terrazzo Granby rock fireplace. That this kind of phoenix-like rebirth of the house. And what I really like about this series of photos, it shows that even people who've come in and completely changed the style of their house, these kind of fireplaces remain. And I think for me personally, like this image is like a success. It's like people who ultimately it's like you disappear, someone else has moved in and they've made it their own home. And then this kind of package of work evolved into what became Granby Workshop. And so at this moment, we were nominated for the Turner Prize, which is, I guess, one of the most prestigious art prizes in the UK.
And you were the first architecture studio.
First architecture and first collective.
Right? Yeah.
And so we were like, well, we had a long kind of conversation about what we could do, and we were like, well, we're not artists as such. We're also not like ethnographers. If we try and tell the story in the gallery, that will just come across probably quite patronizing. Yeah. We'll do it badly, right? It's like, it's not what we do well. And so we're like, well, actually what we should do is we should kind of try and continue the project. And so we came up with this idea that taking these kind of products and items that had been designed for the house in Granby, setting up a workshop that could produce them in Granby, that they could then be sold at the Turner Prize exhibition, and then that money would come back into Granby. And so you're kind of creating a kind of economic activity within the area. And so created these, like, developed this into a series of objects that, I mean, some of these ideas aren't very new. They're very much arts and crafts ideas about things that could be mass-produced, but that through mass production would exhibit the kind of mark of the maker. So kind of series of different projects here. Kind of set up the workshop in one of the empty buildings on the area. And now it's a kind of ongoing business. Again, another example of a business that it's now an employee-owned company that we have a seat on the board, and the CLT also have a seat on the board. It recently launched it's now working predominantly with completely recycled ceramic bodies, so recycled clay. And so, yeah, I mean, COVID was really hard for it. It had a bit of but it's sort of emerging and now kind of coming back into strength. And has been like a real amazing source of ongoing collaboration. So often when we have projects, we'll look to talk to using Granby within those projects.
Yeah. And it's still running as
still running, yeah. It's still running. There's 5 employees. It's moved site to a bigger site. Still in the area. Still very local. Still, still with the same. I mean, someone from Assemble ended up moving to Liverpool to set up, and is now doing a PhD in ceramics and clay bodies as a result. So he's kind of still associated with Assemble, but like kind of doing like, as a result of this project, is going to go a completely different path. It's like, yeah, he's finishing up his PhD at the moment, based in Liverpool, specifically around like recycled clays and recycled clay bodies.
Wow.
And then the kind of final project within Liverpool I talked to is the Winter Garden.
Right.
And I guess it's an example of, so you've got the housing, you've got kind of work, and I guess an idea about that, like a functioning neighborhood needs like a mix of uses and mix of functions. And like, if you think about the neighbors you like the most, they're often ones that combine like housing, they can bring on work, they can combine socializing. And so we had this idea, and this was a kind of complete, this particular image was a kind of fantasy image of a kind of public garden within one of the kind of burnt out houses. And again, through the attention of the Turner Prize, we talked to the CLT, and we'll do 10 days of work without any fee, and we'll kind of put together a funding package and look to get funding for it. And took 2 houses on the street and proposed essentially like a community centre for the area, but a community centre that was built around this kind of garden in the house. So turning that kind of initial like fantasy into something that could exist in 2 real buildings. And that opened in 2019. Again, then shut again because of COVID. And then reopened again in 2022. And it is like, it provides this kind of, I guess, again, the budget was about £250,000, but provides this kind of public heart to the street. So there are these 2 houses, they're right in the middle of the street. It hosts events, it hosts their meetings, it hosts kids' parties, but also it's a place that people can just come to. Working with Granby Workshop, so they developed new tiles for the shower room, and then it was one of the first spaces that used the tiles that were developed for the Venice Biennale. And what's quite nice about I like the project is, again, it's like it works very closely within the existing fabric. Like from the outside, you hardly notice that there's anything odd about the house. You have to look at the roof to realize something's a bit up.
Yeah.
But if you get close, you suddenly realize that there's plants in the windows, and there's no floors, and it's this kind of discovery, and it feels very much of something that belongs to the area and is of the area and belongs to the people. Yeah.
I mean, I think this idea of making residents this agents of change in the neighborhood, and of like participating in actually like making the neighborhood within urban developments is very interesting, because usually you associate redevelopments with, of course, housing, but then probably more of a consumption-based model, so like stores and bars and cafes and where.
And I guess for us, it's also about it being shared. So, like, I mean, I could talk a lot about this project. 'Cause it's like, but so like all the houses are, half of them are rented, half of them are sold. The ones that are sold with a legal caveat that means that the value of the house can only rise by the value of the median income of the area. And so there's a whole idea about like, it's trying to preserve it's a kind of communal collective ownership, and so for the ones that are kept in rental, that is a literal collective ownership. But even the ones that are sold off, it's trying to maintain and avoiding, I guess, the risks of redevelopment, which is that the people who are already there get forced out.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I guess the gentrification is a very complicated conversation topic, but I guess this is an example of like, the area needed to be developed. It was, you know, most of the houses were derelict, they were falling down, but how do you try and do that in a way that doesn't force people out? And completely worth saying, like, it's small, you know, in the scale of development, but I think you have to start small to kind of prove that these things can hopefully grow in scale.
And it's a model that you can sort of scale.
And hopefully there's I mean, the kind of CLT movement in general is definitely growing.
Yeah.
I guess another project that does something very similar is Baltic Street Adventure Playground, this time with children, which is also really nice, and found this site that had been promised would be developed as a playground, but the money had disappeared in. So we're like, okay, well, we'll take the site, we'll bring some money, and we'll just open it with the least amount of infrastructure possible to be a playground. And this is a kind of soft opening we did in October. During the school holidays, we'd be like, look, kids, you're welcome here. We're going to hire 2 play workers. We're going to come down. We're going to bring outdoor clothing. We're going to bring mud. We're going to bring wood chip. We're going to bring stuff. And you can just come and see how it works. And again, it was this idea about very quickly, very immediately trying to do something on the site that talked about its future use. And then I think particularly with talking about working with children, also created a space that was outside of obvious interference from adults and provided this kind of state of exception. Mm-hmm. And then this is at the same time while doing the actual design work and the actual work to kind of create the kind of actual permanent playground. And then the playground itself opened, and really the kind of key architecture is a fence. And the reason why the fence is there is because legally you have to have a fence that's 1.8 meters high for it to be able to be an adventure playground in the UK. Right. And that's like a kind of health and safety kind of checklist. And then everything inside that was about like trying to create, like I said, this sort of space of exception that enabled children to play, and looking at what the barriers to children coming. That was about like the children coming together, taking ownership, and at the end of every day they could come together and talk about what's happened, and the children are allowed to kind of express their agency on the space, use tools, make stuff, and I think that's, again, it's like in some ways it's directly taking the thing that we saw so positive about our early work and kind of sharing it with others. Yeah. And similarly, this is now an independent charity. It's been running 5 years. It's a kind of also runs a food bank out of it. And it's a kind of funny project where it's like it's fundamentally not about aesthetics at all. Yeah. It is like the aesthetics are about the kind of chaos that children bring to a space, and about that joy, and about this kind of malleability. And it doesn't follow the kind of adult ideas of what should look good. And that's like the entire point of it. But it's like quite funny because it's like the design here is, you know, the fence is at the back there, and the landscaping, and it's all like infrastructure that is almost invisible and kind of needs to be invisible, and that's the kind of, and so it's quite funny in that way. But I think that's quite a kind of an extreme example of where like the program is everything. We think that for us, sustainability comes from a kind of clarity and honesty in the materials and in the fabric, and a kind of not trying to rely on systems to kind of make a building efficient in a way, and relying on like the kind of physical infrastructure, and being very conscious about, I guess, sustainability in one sense, but also I guess about ecology. I think sustainability is also very, again, I personally don't like the word sustainability because it implies that what we're doing should be sustained in any particular way. And I guess for us, we like trying to think about ecologically, thinking like terrestrially. And so I guess a project that sort of talks to that quite a lot is a building that was opened last year for the Luma Foundation in Arles, and for Atelier Luma. And so Atelier Luma are a kind of research arm of the Luma Foundation that looks at promoting, I guess they talk about like bioregional design. And so for them, that means like looking at the kind of territory you exist in and using that as a basis. We were originally kind of approached for a mini competition between us and BC architects, and we talked to BC and said it'd be much more interesting if should we like do it together. I think BC suggested it first. We're like, yeah, okay, we'll suggest that. So we came to the client, we're like, well, we don't really want to compete, but we do want to work together instead. And they were like, okay, all right. And so it became this like really nice organic relationship where us, BC, and Luma Atelier were kind of like the three creatives behind the project. The Luma Atelier also being the client, but they have their own kind of design knowledge, and kind of working quite intensely in residencies within Luma, working with big models. And this project was quite extreme because it was like an exemplar. They really wanted to push it. And so working on the idea of like looking at the territory around the site and what was available there to kind of look at opportunities for building. There was about 20 different materials that got developed during the course of the project, and then of that, like 3 or 4 actually turned into things that were usable. And some of this was research they were already doing in the atelier, and some of it is stuff that came out. So key one being kind of rice husks. It's a huge area of rice and sunflower husks growing in the area. Stone. It's a like very important quarries in France. And then because they had this, essentially the site was this empty warehouse that would become the project, we were able to use this for like physical testing of a kind of this huge range of these materials and a kind of iterative process. So I'm going to talk about 3 kind of elements within that in a bit more detail. So the first was, I guess, a kind of earth plaster insulation build-up. And this was looking at, like I said, there's a huge amount of waste rice and sunflower kind of stalk, essentially straw. And so working with the atelier, we looked at ways of essentially making kind of compressed rice husks and using if you compress the rice husks with some of the sunflower, you get a kind of natural bioresin that forms within the sunflower, and using that kind of as a self-binder, and then gets kind of finished with an earth plaster. And again, this being kind of prototyped and iterated on site. And so over the course of the project, it kind of got better. And it's kind of, again, this is unlike, let's say, something like the project in Granby where the client needs the thing to work straight away. Here there's an understanding that there's a risk involved in these materials, and so like they're not going to all be perfect, and that's kind of part of the project. And then so like going from prototypes, cubes, to kind of panels, to whole walls, and kind of developing the process. And a lot of these are about also learning from like historic methods of building. And so I guess it's not ignoring technology, but it's also not ignoring the kind of past. And so they're kind of learning from the best of what we did previously, because we've actually got it wrong a lot of the time. So this is a kind of example of a kind of finished panel. Then BC architects, do you know of them? They're kind of experts in like rammed earth and rammed earth construction. So it was a kind of whole process of looking at the kind of, this was largely focused on looking at the qualities of the dust that came out of the stoneworks, which kind of is almost like a natural binder. It's very fine dust. And looking at how that could be used directly, again, testing it in kind of large-scale models, kind of large-scale prototypes, and using this dust as a kind of binder that creates both. So there's a kind of series of different things going on here. On the back one, you can see they're kind of compressed blocks, and the front is a kind of more traditional rammed earth. And because this dust it's a limestone, so it kind of has some of the functions as lime, but without having to burn it. I mean, it doesn't bind. It does not bind in the same way that lime does, but it does calcify very gradually over time. And that was a kind of trying to think of understanding. And this examples of those kind of finished walls in situ, and then finally looking at like very like elemental timber construction. We use a lot. I think timber construction is something that we're very interested in. There's a lot of really good traditional joinery that you can learn from. And here, working again, the kind of experimenters here were working with the kind of sunflower oil and local kind of indigo production to create a sort of series of stains and paints and dyes that create this kind of gallery structure within the building. Again, working through kind of large models, working through one-to-one prototypes. And here, I guess the idea was the kind of no glue, so the thing can be disassembled, and like minimum mechanical fixings. So it's very expressive joinery within that. And then kind of here's that kind of completed space. And so this is their main workshop space. So the space before was a kind of foyer where they do their offices, and this one, so the rammed earth is kind of the offices, and the timber here is a kind of series of more kind of physical workshops. And this was for the opening, so they kind of turned it into a kind of exhibition space.
I actually visited the space in June, and it was very impressive to see how they are like experimenting with creating new materials all the time. And I guess somehow the building keeps changing through that, right? So they keep like adding or changing materials somehow, or developing new.
Yeah, and like little details. So like all the handles were, the push plates are kind of covered in a kind of bioresin they were developing.
Right.
And so that was really, I mean, it was very fun as well for us, because you could literally like hot off like testing. You'd be like, well, what can we, because there's some things that they were kind of inventing materials, but they had no real idea of how they might be used. They're like kind of, because they're kind of playing in a way of finding these new things. And so like, that was quite really entertaining, really fun for us to be able to like literally, as materials being developed, to be like, okay, well, how does this work? How could we use this? Can it be used structurally? Can it be used decoratively? And kind of playing with it. And this actually even comes to the garden. This garden is quite fun, where it's each of these zones is a different geographic area, and it's plants they're bringing for like particular like functions, and it's all irrigated from the toilet flushing. So it's one of those toilets that has like separates urine and feces, and the urine goes to fertilize the plants. And so, like I said, it's a project that it's in itself. It's like it pushes everything to the furthest it can, and because it can do that. But I guess the idea is trying to then, for them, and we're conversating with them, how you can then take the ones that are most successful, and how you start looking at a kind of mass audience. So I think hopefully it's come out like, I guess craft is this kind of underlying thread. But like I said, I mean, our diversity is a strength and sometimes a weakness, because sometimes people don't necessarily know what we do. So at the smaller scale, we do kind of furniture installations. This was a project for Clerkenwell Design Week that they wanted a kind of square filled with furniture, and we designed this kind of tessellating unit that was a very simple triangle, but you could put together in like hundreds of different ways to create your own little furniture. And it's a kind of, like I said, a very, very small, very short project. But it was about, I guess, again, this idea of craft, but also the idea of agency, this idea of like how people coming to the square could make space for themselves. And so it's a kind of little joke. Kind of jumping up a scale. A lot of our work, we do a lot of kind of exhibition and gallery design. And I guess for us, it's also a way of testing ideas in a way that it's like, you can test ideas in a way that you can't do in a full-scale project. So the Brutalist Playground was a commission through the Royal Institute of British Architects. And it was a project we worked with this photographer called Simon Terrell, and looking at, there's a kind of legacy of like brutalist playgrounds in kind of brutalist estates, and bringing those into the gallery, but making them in foam as a kind of, I guess, play on like safety and what our culture is about, and play, but also just create something that's kind of joyful. And it's kind of amazing that when you sort of see adults like play, which is like very rare, but underpinned by an idea about like thinking of I guess for us at least these playgrounds, like they thought about how children kind of enter the public realm.
What material is this?
It's a recycled foam, so it's basically old sofas and offcuts and things like that. So like, and they chop it all down and stick it back together, and then when the project's finished, it gets chopped back down again and stuck back down again. So it's
very soft.
Yeah, it's soft and squidgy, but you get in different layers, different amounts of squidginess. So you get hardness, you get kind of more squidgy, less squidgy. It's interesting, like the founders are getting a bit older. We're having kids. Yeah. But we're also thinking, I guess, as an organization, how the new generation. So we still have a kind of flat hierarchy. We haven't really spoken about our structure much. We still have a kind of flat hierarchy. Anyone who joins, if they're still with us 2 years later, is eligible to join the partnership. And so now in a position where our first employees 5-6 years ago have now been partners for 4 years and are taking on some of the control on their self. And so, I mean, it's a kind of slightly funny photo, but I think for us it's also about how, like, assemble as a project and how we kind of hold on to some of those kind of, I guess, collaborative and collective roots. So yeah, I think that's so like how assemble as a project is also evolving within that. It always is about like working with and finding and really closely collaborating with people already on the ground. And for us, then I guess it's about trying to really understand about who's there, what they're doing, what their needs are, and then a lot of it has been about trying to then turn through kind of the process, trying to like represent and document and turn those ideas into something that like in this, let's say a building owner might understand. Whereas like they won't understand a kind of series of loose ideas, but if you create a document or booklet, like this is how much it will cost, this is what we think we'll do, this is who's going to operate it, it then feels a lot realer. And so both like the House of Annetta I just showed, or Granby, a lot of the project was, or Black Horse Workshop was about like turning maybe kind of slightly more ad hoc, loose ideas and trying to turn them into a form that the people who either own the land or make the decisions, or the councils, could like understand and could be funded. I mean, architects are coordinators. In design, I remember when I was studying, like, you're never the expert pretty much on anything in a building. The engineer will know more about the structure, the M&E person will know more about the environment, most of the contractors will know more about the materials that they're doing. You are the person who knows how everything comes together, and I think in some ways it's the same idea, but also thinking programmatically and economically. Yeah. We had the kind of fortune or the serendipity, or however you want to talk about, being given that space, but you can do things at a smaller scale. I think a lot of it is also about, find craftspeople, find people who are again, like I said, we're not the expert in any of these things. Almost always they're people we're working very closely with who know more about us. So I think I'd say, like, if you don't have the space, find people you're interested in. So if you're really interested in working with timber, or really interested in working in ceramics, find those people and go to learn from them. And I think that, that's always our approach to lots of these things. And I think especially when you're young, you have the benefit of time. You can, I'm getting older. I can't work as many hours. I can't, but when we were younger, a lot of it was just about we just because we were passionate about it, we just threw time at things. And I guess an interesting transition, actually, in some ways, as getting older, is how we maintain some of those things while at the same time, finishing in time to go home to the kids, and that has a difference. But I think, so my advice was, partner, find people who have the resources, have the skills, but in a way that is mutually beneficial. You want to make sure that you're offering something in return, and also never think that too small a space is. You can always do something even in a small space, and I think that a lot of it, I think, is it's about attitude as much as it is about anything else.